Well, good day and welcome back to The Secret. Today I'm going to talk a little bit more about the puzzle that people are thinking are in Milwaukee in the Pierre Marquette Park. And so to assist with this today, I've loaded a couple of photos into the description. And these are photographs of Marquette Park, specifically of the entryway and of the statue. Uh, the link for the image number 10 is also there as well. So I'll give you a second or two to get those images going so that we can maybe make some observations about the. I'm going to go back to the image and point out a few things that I don't think they've pointed out before. And I'm using the PB Works image, and I've been trying to figure out for a while um, what the um, relevant information is for the bottom of the, the painting. And after looking at the P and O area and looking at that on both sides in the green area, I'm kind of maybe thinking that that's, if you look at that closely, I think that could be evergreen, like an evergreen plant, evergreen bush. So I'm thinking that maybe that green bottom background is some sort of evergreen or vegetation. I guess it could simply be grass, but I like the idea of it being evergreen bush, tree, that kind of thing. And then I've been looking at this background as well, and it's almost like a storm or a cloud of locusts. If you think that truly is a locust, I may have discovered an answer for that. And so in the background, you have this big cloud. And then the other thing is that I'm starting to think that that building is maybe actually a candlestick with wax cascading down the side of it. And that might explain the appearance of that building in the background, that that's a basically candle with wax. I'm also coming to the conclusion that these circular structures of the uh, gown that the hands are coming out of might actually be a canoe. That could be two types of canoes. One on the one hand, and then the sleeve forms a canoe on the other hand over here. There's been some discussion that there's some birch, white birch trees in the Cape. And if you turn that image on the side and look at it, I think that that is a possibility. And if you look at the actual quote unquote item that's below the gemstone, that actually looks like one of those planter pedestals. If you cut off, let's say, a third of that and just look at the first part of it, it almost looks like one of those pedestal uh, items that you could plant some simple plants in right next to that. So if we consider this could be an evergreen bush, and that those are some birch trees, and that that's one of those round planters, I'm going to go back to the photo that I posted at the first of the uh, presentation. This is photo ID 130229 that I got from the historical marker database.org. Okay, so this is the entry to Pear Park off a state. And it's what it looked like approximately, I think, in 2010. And so I'm going to do some deep analysis of this. Okay, so go back to the image again and then compare it to the texture of this evergreen bush that you have right here where the Pierre Marquette sign is. Compare it and see if that foreground in the image actually starts to now look like an evergreen plants, if you will. that surrounded this sign. Now, look at the two trees that are in the background of the photograph. They're silver birch trees. There's actually three of them because the angle in which this photo was taken obscures the view of the other tree that was in the park at the time. So you've got these three silver birch trees that are in close proximity to a sign that says Marquette Park. And then if you look at the image and you think, well, that cape, that coat is exactly like the cape and coat that's in a painting at the Marquette University, you have basically this figure rising out of this bush, if you will, this uh, evergreen bush, and it matches kind of what's going on in the image. And then if you go back to the image and look at the trees that are on the side, and if you consider those silver birch trees sticking up there, you've got the evergreen tree in the foreground, you've got Marquette in the center, and then you've got the birch trees. It's the next level in the background. And then behind that, if you look at off into the distance, you would have this outline of City Hall from that exact perspective. So what I'm thinking and proposing here is that if you would go back to the time at which this was taken, this photo would also show you the band shell steps. In the background, you've got the three pillars back there, and you've got the round dome with the pillars. There must have been some sort of shed with a green door at some point in time over here to the uh, left-hand side. And then you've got the Marquette. In this photo, you can also see, if you pan over to the right-hand side, you can see the actual statue of Marquette and the slab of, oh, let's just say stone, the rosy colored stone over there, where that statue is with the arm extended. Now, I've been a proponent of, I don't know, and then also if you look in the background between the two trees, you have one of those planter boxes on a pedestal base in direct view across the park. The rotating restaurant above the Hyatt would be seen off into the distance of this photograph, further away. And that red ball, if you will, that sits on top of the bridge on Kilbourne, if you move slightly upwards, you could see that, as well as the arm that extends over for the passenger cars that go across there. So I'm going to go move to the other photo, and the other photo is from the other end of the park. And this is the photo that's a picture of the arm extended. This is photo 619785. And this was, if you note in this photograph, you've got this yellow flower planted around the figure. And you've got, again, these candelabra posts, as I call them. You know, the bunch of lamps, they all look like that key turned upside down, the way in which the top of that lands on there. And from this perspective, you can see all the way across the park, and you can also see those planter things on the square bases. And the one kind of makes this funny curve that looks like the curve that's in the hand with the bird in it. And again, these flowers look to be the type of flowers that, who knows how long those have been planted there. But what you can see is that you can see basically the opposite view. Okay, so the third picture is a straight-on view of the large piece of stone. And on this large piece of stone, you can see a Native American with basically a boat in the hands. And you can see Marquette standing on a pedestal base. And there's a series of rocks in front of the figure. And I've been looking at this, I don't know, image some more. And I've tried to determine whether or not there is any of the black outer part of that coat are rocks. If any of those actually form a rock that can be identified in that pile of rocks that are in front of that figure. But from this photo, you actually have the figure with an arm extended, uh, holding the cross in the other hand, and you have these little, I don't know, spindly tree things in the background that says, Pere Marquette with the big M, and there's like a small V there on that big thing of stone or whatever it is. And in the background of this is again another one of those planter boxes that sit on top of one of those pedestals. And this one actually gives you a view of a sign. And the sign is on the pole. And I don't know how many, and in the background, this one you can also see that ball that sits up on the bridge. So I don't know how long these signs have been in the park. Uh, but the sign in the background actually tells you what the park hours are. And let's just say that this is the actual configuration of the park back at the time. And you get the message that tells you take as many steps as the hour. Maybe the sign with the hour on it of the park means that you got this little planter box, you've got this church key sign that, and on it you have the hours of the park. And what you're supposed to do is then measure east of there. Let's say the park closes at 10. You're supposed to go then 10 steps from that point to a place where you should um, get to the item. I mean, I'm just thinking out loud here. If the hours are posted in the park and they're the same location they were at the time, then maybe that's what we could be missing that could be used. So again, if you go back, to the verses, and again, I don't like mismatching verses because I think there's so many elements in each image that match to the verse that is sequentially numbered that uh, there's no need to go mixing them up because you can see, the natives, obviously Marquette, the volumes, you can see that twice as many east steps as the hour or more from the middle of one branch of the V. And so I don't know if it seems like all of those instructions are off of uh, the same place. And if you wanted to take this image and extrapolate it into some sort of V, if you will, and then head east from here, you could have a pretty good a place. Or if one of these signs happens to be on a pole that makes a V, that could be the orienting point. But it seems like there would be one orientation point within this park off of one of these landmark ideas that would suit the location to get us to a specific spot. And uh, since I don't live in Milwaukee, I can't just run out there and see what makes the most sense. Uh, for the, I mean, the Isle of B, in my opinion, uh, is could be the bus station or the bus stop, could be the bratwurst spot. I mean, I honestly think it's the bratwurst spot. It's Usinger's because in my previous video I talked about the relationships to that. Well, I want to build on another point. This will, if you don't like just confirmation bias or fun information, then this is probably where you can stop. If you're just looking at my analysis of some of the markers in Pierre uh, Marquette Park. But let's look at some interesting things that have to do with um, uh, Wisconsin. And the thing I'm going to talk about is a person by the name of Laura Ingalls Wilder. So, Laura Elizabeth Ingalls Wilder was an American writer who wrote Little House on the Prairie. And this was a series of children's books that was published between 32 and 43. And it was also turned into a popular television show that was on TV, which many people of Byron's generation probably would have been familiar with. But the thing about her is that she was born in Pepin, uh, Wisconsin, and she was actually the family lived 7 miles north of the village of Pepin, Wisconsin, and this was in the Big Woods area. And she wrote several books about her experiences growing up. And as a native Wisconsin, I think we'd be lost without pointing out a couple of things. Well, one thing about her is that she actually had a stillborn or a near stillborn brother, and she also has this relationship with Indian country. If you want to talk about volumes, her early growing up was written about in 3 volumes, if you will. Her father was also written about as well. And since we're spelunking, Laura Ingalls Wilder's basically their home was a dugout, if you will. And that is kind of how or what she grew up. The main connection is that she wrote books, these books for Little House on the Prairie. And the reason I bring this up is because I looked at this image figure a number of times, and I sometimes get vibes of Michael Landon. And Michael Landon is an actor that starred in the show Little House on the Prairie. And again, it was a mud hut, mud camp, that type of thing. And uh, I think one of the original names for Milwaukee was Mudtown, right? Mudtown. And Laura Ingalls Wilder grew up in a mud hut, if you will, Mudtown, mud hut, native of Wisconsin. And but anyway, I get vibes of Michael Landon from that image. And again, this would take us back uh, to that. The other thing about Laura Ingalls Wilder is that um, she was actually a descendant of one of the first uh, people that arrived on the Mayflower. She's a descendant of the Delano family, and that's the ancestry or ancestral family of U.S. President Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And I think there's some mentions in the back of the book about FDR. And she's also the seventh great granddaughter of a Mayflower passenger by the name of Richard Warren. And she was a third cousin, once removed, of U.S. President of the Civil War General Ulysses S. Grant Park. Okay, so we have some overlapping possibilities there uh, between the puzzles. Okay, so that's the Massachusetts Bay Colony is actually how far back you can date her father. Um, okay, so I also, when you look at the image figure, and let's go back to the secret, look at the image. I always look at the face of this person and I see like a ponytail on the right hand side of the face. In other words, that hair to me looks like a ponytail. And if you go back to the story Little House on the Prairie, and you know what the story is, you know that the little girl uh, on the TV series always was wearing these uh, uh, braided pigtails or ponytails. I mean, she always appeared in these pigtails, uh, ponytails, pigtails. The only thing that they don't use at Usinger's uh, uh, is the tail of the pig, the pigtail. So they don't use the pigtail up there at the sausage place, right? Okay, so the other interesting thing about being born in Pepin, uh, because the other interesting thing about being born in Pepin, Wisconsin, is that Pepin the Short uh, was the king of Franks, Frankfurter, uh, Frankenstein. But let's just say that Pepin the Short, and we know this Pierre Marquette guy is obviously short, not a tall person. He's French. But anyway, if you consider that she was born in Pepin, and Pepin is the king of Franks, well, of course we've got that. But okay, let's just not make too much fun here because the Frankish kingdom in Europe is Germany. And so, if you want a true reference to the old world, uh, why not have Pepin uh, and the Frankish realm, which included much of Germany, um, in your story, right? Uh, his rule was historically significant and greatly beneficial to the Franks. And the Franks are Western European people during the Roman Empire and early Middle Ages. They began as a Germanic uh, people who lived near the Lower Rhine. So I just point out the Pepin comment or connection. So in the story of the 4 years, the first 4 years, Laura Ingalls speaks of an incident where she lives with her in-laws. And in this in-law living relationship, uh, she has an incident where Brewster, she's living with the Brewster family, if you will, at this point in time. And as she's living with the Brewsters, she's like 16 years old. She's got, she's just, taking a job teaching. And she's living with the Brewsters. And there's an incident where a butcher knife is presented to her housing companions, and that the wife of the husband pulls a butcher knife and apparently eventually talks down the lady from doing anything any more devastating than that. But there, if you look at the image a little closer than normal, and you start looking at that key in the eye position, uh, looking at I2 on the that key could actually be a butcher knife. And I like this being a butcher knife for a couple of reasons. Because if it's a butcher knife, then obviously we've got Usingers as being, a place where they would use butchered animals. And then the other thing that I like about Laura Ingalls Wilder is that Laura Ingalls married a man by the name of Wilder. And during this 4 years, uh, he contracted diphtheria, and so did she. He was 25 when he married her, and she was like 16. So it was a May December type of deal. But the walking cane in here might have been used by Wilder because of the fact that um, he did not fully recover from diphtheria, and as a result, uh, he was partially paralyzed and unable to use uh, his legs for a period of time. And The other thing is that Laura Ingalls Wilder also had a stillborn child. Again, kill when born, or kill as born, if you will. And uh, so while that didn't happen in Wisconsin, it's certainly pertinent and part of the story of uh, Wilder. So I tried to get this information on her husband. Uh, well, it's not that important. Is when she got married and all this. Uh, so anyway, uh, it's just interesting to note that there was a stillborn in that as well. What else do I have? The interesting thing about the tale and the story of Laura Ingalls Wilder is that in June of 1873, a year before the Ingalls arrived, a mystifying cloud had darkened the sky of their home. Like a demonic visitation, it was flickering red with silver edges and appeared to be alive, arriving at racehorse speed. This, of course, made the sound of 1,000 scissors cutting and snipping. Everyone started to cringe under the hail of falling insects. You had to hold your hands over your face to keep them from hitting your eyes. And so this locust swarm that infected the country in the 1870s hit the Ingalls Wilder uh, family, the Little House on the Prairie, uh, really, really hard. And so, if you want an explanation of the locust and why the evergreen in the image, again, going back to the image, why in the foreground of the image you have this green appearance, and then in the background you have the swarming reddish cloud of destruction with a locust in it, and you have this seemingly dark cloud there. Perhaps it's indicative of the references we're trying to make to the native of Wisconsin, uh, Laura Ingalls Wilder, and the Little House on the Prairie connections. Okay. Anything new? So here's the information on her husband. Her husband's name was Almanzo James Wilder. And Almanzo basically, contracted this uh, problem. And then in 1889, in August, Laura gave birth to a son. The child remained unnamed when 2 weeks later he suddenly died of convulsions. Laura Ingalls Wilder never spoke of his death, and the couple did not have another child. Well, they had a child before this, and her name was Rose Wilder Lane, and she became a political activist in California. Uh, and there's some mentions in the book about political activism in that time. All right, so that's the fun information. The other thing that I would point out is that Laura Ingalls Wilder's father was also a butcher as a trade, and so he was a butcher and he was a singer. Uh, so if there's a bit of the rosy cheeks and the ponytail of that in that image, then perhaps we found something of interest there. Okay, what else do I have? I think that's going to about cover it. There's some new images that you can get. Uh, I will just add as a final thought. The other day I was talking about all the connections there are to the other Wisconsin native from West Allis by the name of Liberace. And I found that Liberace was fond of having boats and had a lake property, and there's some stuff in the book that takes you to Las Vegas and all the costumes and gowns. But one of the things that Liberace said, and one of Liberace's quotes was this one. Uh, uh, let's see. Uh, it's the one about the bank. I gotta find it. Uh, uh, oh, the bank. I used to cry all the way to the bank, but then I bought it. Okay, that was after he famously said that people talk about me all the time, but uh, I'm laughing my way all the way to the bank. Laughing your way all the way to the bank. Now, how could you apply that quote in this park? Because you have a bank on one side and you have a river bank on the other. So, which of the two banks do you go to? The river bank or the other bank? Men's clothes are becoming kind of mod. They're becoming more colorful and more flamboyant. And the male peacock is beginning to show his true plumage. Oh, there you go. Liberace once said, I don't profess to be a healer, a minister, a priest. I feel as an entertainer, I can do more good for the world than I would if I were a soapbox orator or a self made politician. Uh, so, yeah, so, I like the bank quote. Uh, so, if I were president, I would spend the money that is spent on wars every 20 years and spend it on giving people work. Let them build roads, bridges, buildings, and schools. Well, how many of those three things are right there to yeah, I don't you can have either the resurrection or you can have Liberace, but you can't have both. He actually said these things. How would that apply? How would that apply to a rhapsodic man? How would that apply? Uh, oh yeah, one of his famous Hollywood quotes from Liberace was, "I've done my bit for motion pictures," and he said this at an awards show 20 years after he made his first movie and only movie. I've stopped making them. Uh, oh, here's the famous quote. When the reviews are bad, I tell my staff, again, my staff, there's a staff in the image, if you will, that they can join me as I cry all the way to the bank. And again, you've got the staff in there. Anyone that dares begrudge what I have today just better get off their duff and do something about it. Well, anyway, Liberace has so many quotes that he was basically literally a quote machine. But so rhapsodic man soil or gaze north toward the Isle of B. Period. B period. A B period. Well, anyway, folks, I'm going to see if anybody joined in. Well, nobody joined in for this encore performance on The Secret. So I appreciate everybody that watches this show. If you have any ideas about The Secret, feel free to post them in the chat. I doubt they'll ever get to Milwaukee to look for an actual spot and dig. But I'm fairly convinced with all of the review I've done of this puzzle that by orienting, I actually think that if the actual cask has anything to do with the cedar evergreen bush and the sign that got moved and the two silver birch trees, and that's why I started this presentation talking about that, because I truly believe that if this could still be found, I'm just going to give you my location right now. I think that they're probably somewhere behind that entryway sign and those two birch trees, there was at one time a sign that gave you the hours of the park operations. And it would have been on one of these poles that looked like the church key, a candelabra, if you will. And then if you took 10 paces uh, from there, I think you would get to the actual dig spot. And the dig spot might be like two walls of that path that come to a L shape. And on the top of it, or maybe it's the rounded corner, if you will. But in the general proximity of that, there's going to be one of those bases that has the um, flower pot box in it. Not box, but the actual planter. But I don't think it's in the planter. It could be, because he's done that before, but they don't look deep enough, and it would seem like accidental discovery would have occurred by now in one of those, if that was the simple roots. I don't think it's close to a tree, it'd been too hard to dig. But if you would take that retaining wall and find a point that's 10 to 12 steps east and get to a reasonable place where there's two corners of that wall coming together, I think that's the most logical place in that park for it. And I've reviewed some of these photographs that people have put up, and it looks like some people have been digging in that one corner of the park where there's kind of like the same idea of the two walls coming together a certain distance from one of those lampposts. So maybe somebody's already exploring this idea and put it in practice. But I honestly think that you've got to be off of the state street side where that evergreen was, because if you look at the image, I'm almost convinced myself now that the foreground of this image, that if you actually put a magnifying glass to it, and you look at an evergreen bush, right, and then you look at this green area, you look at an evergreen bush, and you look over here, and you look back and forth, you'll start seeing the individual shapes of an evergreen bush, not a pine tree, not a pinyon tree, but an evergreen. And it makes sense to me that that's what you would see in this image, looking at it from that way. And that you still incorporate the frank and the sausage and Liberace and the hair. I still think that's a ponytail and the hair. The locust cloud storm could be, easily accounted for. So anyway, thanks so much for joining. Always have a good time looking at some of these puzzles, and I'm probably going to be done with my review of The Secret and these puzzles here at the end of the year. I need to move on to something else. This hobby kind of bogs you down, and you can't spend too much time on it, or it draws the energy out of you. But I hadn't looked at these puzzles for 8 to 9 months, so I decided to take a new look at them, and this is kind of what I've come up with. So thanks so much. Have a good day.